I surrendered to Christ in December 2012 and was baptized with my family, my two daughters and my wife, on April 2013. And I was the age of 42 at the time. So leading up to this, in my parents' home as a child, the only time I really ever attended church, I remember a vacation Bible school when I was 5 years old, maybe an occasional Sunday service with my grandparents. They lived on a farm in the middle of Iowa, a little Bethel Chapel, one-room church, and I'd spend summers with them. But as a consequence, I really didn't know the Bible. I didn't know God, certainly didn't believe. And then in 1986, we moved from Iowa to Branson, Missouri. And so I spent my teenage years there, and it was kind of a turbulent time for my parents. Had a depression issue, things like that. But at 18, I went to Missouri State, just a couple of blocks from your church, and had a full ride scholarship. I was an academic achiever. But when I got to school, it was my first shot at adulthood, and I didn't do very good at it. I kind of fell into the party scene, gave up going to class, really didn't have a direction. And then I remember eventually the university sent a letter to my parents and suspended me and said, you could come back, but you need a year to get your life in order. So for the next 2 years, between the ages of 18 and 20, I always worked. I had a job, but really didn't have a purpose to what I was doing. And as a consequence to that, I kind of fell in with the wrong crowd, was caught stealing, spent 5 years of supervised probation, and even a little bit of time in the county jail. But life was about to change for me. It was one of those pivotal times in my life. Met my future wife, Joy. We were married 2 years later. Right after our marriage, 9 months after our marriage date, we had our first baby, Haley. And I remember thinking, I've got to change what I'm doing. I really need to focus and become a good parent. So I was always a diligent worker, but I found a job at a local moving company. It was 2 men in a truck in Blue Springs, Missouri. Started out as a laborer, became a driver, eventually became a salesman and a manager. And then at the age of 27 in 1999, I purchased that business that I was employed at. She offered to sell it to me. And I didn't have a lot of confidence, so I took in my best friend and brother-in-law as my business partner. Now, we both kind of had the same goal in business. We wanted to become wealthy. We wanted to be self-made men. But it didn't take me long to realize that owning a small business with him was a mistake. And unfortunately, 5 years into the partnership, he filed a lawsuit against me. And unfortunately, when things like that happen, it involves not only him and myself, but also our family. So there was a rift that caused with the family and our relationships with Joy's parents and sister and things like that. But I moved on with the business. I was awarded the business, and I had some really good years with it. I was always able to solve problems, come up with solutions. It was kind of an idol for me. My whole identity was wrapped up in this business. But then, as many of you know, in 2008 and 2009, there was a housing and a stock market crash during that time. It was a time when my business was exploding. We were growing. I was had a line of credit to grow the business. But within a short amount of time, my revenues were down 50%, and there was no recovering from it. It seemed like the harder I worked, the more desperate the situation became. And I realized that there was more to life than just business and family. There was a void in my life. And I knew there had to be something more than what I had experienced up to that point. So finally in 2012, I was feeling very tired, probably even a little bit foolish, but I knew, again, this was a pivotal time. Something had to change in my life, and I was pretty beat down. I was worn out. God had still allowed me to seek answers to my problems. So ironically, both my daughters were saved. One was a teenager, one was a preteen. Sunday mornings, I would take them to two separate Baptist churches in Blue Springs, Missouri. And I remember one day thinking, this is kind of crazy, My kids believe in something. I ought to give it a shot. So it's amazing how God used my children to draw me to him. So I thought maybe this is the answer that I needed. So I visited both churches. Both of them had the same message. There's a God, there's a Savior. And I kind of knew that I'd already really known that, but I didn't see where I fit in. I didn't realize that I was a sinner in need of a Savior. I didn't realize that I just needed to give myself up to Him. But within that year, I discovered another church and a pastor I really liked in Grain Valley, and I started to attend regularly. I was seeking God, and I really listened with my heart. I diligently participated in Sunday school every morning. I went home and I devoured content of the Bible every night. My wife saw this. She saw a change in me, I think. And we were both skeptical of religion, the Christianity religion. But my daily ritual was to read the Bible and pray. So eventually she started attending church with me. And it took several months before I surrendered. It took several months of me questioning and seeking answers before I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was truly saved by the blood of Christ. And I remember that night very vividly. Jesus let me know in a personal, vivid way that will forever be etched in my mind, that left no doubt that I was a saved person destined for eternity in heaven with God. I remember after that, the indwelling of Christ in me led to profound changes in how I ran my business and my lifestyle, and profound changes in the way I thought about things. And it was nice to know that I had someone to lean on daily, and that He was never going to leave or forsake me. And it was a huge relief. It kind of lifted a burden, because I knew that all my past mistakes really didn't matter at that point, and my future mistakes really didn't either. So that's my testimony. My call to ministry is part of my testimony also, I believe. When I became a Christian and was saved, I knew that I was on fire. I knew I was called to serve God, and I knew that I had to show His love to other people. So as a new Christian, I jumped in and I helped in any way that I could. I remember Joy and I would go in and clean the sanctuary on Saturday morning. We'd vacuum carpets, clean pews. We painted walls in the basement for the children's program. I remember when I graduated up to be able to hand out bulletins at the front door on Sunday morning. That was a pretty big deal for me. But at some point, somebody asked me to help with the youth ministry at Grain Valley. It was a D-Now weekend, and we got to be a host home, and I also got to give my testimony. And it was through this ministry that really set me on a course with a compelling desire to serve Christ as a call to ministry. Eventually, there was an opportunity to run the youth group. I did that. Eventually, there was a bivocational opportunity at Grain Valley. So I ran the youth ministry. I was running my business and going to college at that time. But it was easy for me. You know, I loved to teach. I loved to mentor. So I prayed for wisdom from God to guide me. And it's funny because God's always opened clear opportunities for me along the way. He's always shown me where and how He desires me to serve Him. So my call's been confirmed by two different pastors, two different senior pastors, two different congregations, and ultimately my wife, that was my test. She said, "Richard, there's something to this. I believe that you belong in ministry." So I was patient and I carefully considered God's call in my life. And I think it became a clear path for me. And ultimately, I pursued my bachelor's in biblical studies and also my master's in theological studies from Midwestern Theological Seminary.